Hello, my name is Joe Harford, and I'd like to welcome you to this Eat3D tutorial on using reference images inside of ZBrush. Reference images are pretty much the most important thing to have when starting any project, whether it's an M4 gun or a realistic character or even a stylized character. The more reference images you have, the better. You simply cannot rely on just a few images from certain angles to get a full picture of how that form looks. So the more reference images you have, the better. And that's just part of the planning process when starting a new project. Now, there are numerous ways that we can actually bring reference images into ZBrush. And some of them are better than others. So there are pros and cons of each. And I'm going to take you through that whole process. So let's start off by going through imageplane. Imageplane is located in the texture tab and under imageplane. So if we go to the top and click the docking icon, it'll dock to our right sidebar. If we expand the reference views, we can see we have a number of different views which we can actually load references into. We have the front and the back, right, left, top, bottom, and custom views, which we can load in 3/4 views or up or a down view. So let's start by loading in something into our front view. But first, when you load the image in, you have an image size slider where if I load an image in now, it will use the document height as to fill the canvas. And that's not going to work for us at the moment because of the window size. So I need to bring this down to something that fits into my window. You can see that it fits in now because there's a small gap between it and the interface. I'll draw out my mesh again and clear the canvas. And I'll click front view. Now this will take me to what ZBrush thinks is my front view. So if I load an image in now, go to our reference folder and change it to JPEG and load in my front view of Norbert from 3D.sk, ZBrush will pop them in the background there. Now we can change the model opacity, which lets us see the reference image through our model and lets us make changes. So if I change to the move brush and start moving our sphere around to match this reference image. See, that's a quick way of getting the rough shape of the head. Now, if we go to our left view and load an image in, we can now do the same thing, matching everything up to this reference image and getting a rough shape of our model. Now, if I switch back to the front view, it will go back to just the default view of my object with no reference in the back. So I'll need to click Store View. Now, every time I flip back to the left view, my model will be stored, my reference image will be stored, so I can just keep flipping between these as much as I want. Now, to go into perspective to continue to model this, I don't want my reference image in the background, so I can just hit Control-N to make a new document or to clear my document. And then anytime I want to model with the left view again, I just click left view and it'll load it back in. Now, those are the benefits of using imageplane to work, but the negative is my reference images all have to be completely perfectly matched up in Photoshop beforehand. I can use the image slider, but it is a little bit of a trial and error guess as to match these up. So I have the option to resize each of them in Photoshop to be matched up perfectly. But for me, that seems to defeat the point of using references in ZBrush and having a very quick and sort of almost single program workflow. I don't use imageplane very much except in certain circumstances where I'm going to be modeling something, maybe a more hard surface, and I'm going to be spending a lot more time in one single view like this. So now we're going to go on and discuss the grid view, which is something I use a lot. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the grid method of getting images into ZBrush. So if we dock the Draw tab, like I have done here, and then click on Floor, you'll see that we get a grid appear underneath our object. Now the floor is really useful in ZBrush now for seeing if your model's scale looks good or seeing how the model sits in a scene rather than having it just floating. As you can see that we get shadows now on the floor. But it's even more useful for loading in reference images. Go to the front and the back view, expand that, and click on Map 1, Import, and our front view of Norbert. As you'll see, it's been loaded in on one of the reference grids. Now, if I go and load in also a left view, that'll appear on another axis, another reference grid. And the beauty of using this method instead of the image plane method is that we can now just scale these images inside of ZBrush and make sure they match up. So for example, we can see that the top of his head is hitting about this first grid line. So that's the case in the second image as well, but the bottom of the chin is certainly not matching up at all. You can see this even more clearly by hovering over your object, and it'll actually draw a point on the reference grid as it translates to the other reference grid. So I'm going to adjust the side view by moving the vertical offset down, so I can get it a little just in the middle of where I think it's appropriate, and then increase the scale to match as well. Now it's just a matter of playing with the two sliders and getting it as close as possible. See the line of the lips as well match up, and the bottom of the ears as well. So we've got pretty well matching images now. And we can take this a little further and we can add a back view, which is useful for seeing the back of the ears. And we'll use the same method to make sure that it matches our left reference by scaling it up. And in this case, it's good to work off the ears and see we just got the bottom of the ear here is matching the bottom of the ear here. And the grid lines absolutely help a lot. We can increase the grid size or the tiles value so we can have a few more lines to work with. And what I find quite useful is just to quickly adjust the tiles to match up to the bottom of the ear, for example, and check it does in the other view as well. With a little adjustment, and that's good to go. So now we can continue to adjust our model now based off these reference images. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this most efficiently. So we'll just stick into orthographic view for now, but we always want to make sure that we model in perspective as well, as much as possible. So we've got the different fill modes. Now, we can fill with number 1, 2, or 3. And in fill mode 1, we've got a transparent, slightly transparent and faded reference image. In the second one, we've got a pretty much full bright reference image. And in the third one, we've got an exaggerated opacity, which is pretty much based off like a Fresnel effect, which we can use the enhance slider to control the ramp that Fresnel is based off. And then we can enhance the opacity of the background image as well. This itself is kind of useful to sculpt in, but it isn't the best. And when you've got a lot of detail, it can be quite hard to see what's going on. So I much prefer to drop down to fill mode 1 and turn on front. Now front just makes the reference image appear in front of the mesh and with transparency. And you can still use your fill modes. With the matte cap gray, with front on, and a fill mode of 1, I find this the most efficient and best looking way of sculpting. So I'll start to just pull out my model, the rough forms, using this Dynamesh sphere. It really only needs to be rough. And then we'll change to our side view and do the same thing. Because we're using Dynamesh, we can really just pull out without worrying at all about topology. All we're trying to do right now is just get the shape, the rough shape of our head in the scene. So I suggest that you set up a hotkey like I have with Shift P to turn on and off the grid, and we can turn on and off perspective with P. The next phase, if I read Dynamesh now, is to match up in, for example, a 3/4 view using some sort of other reference images, which you'd be able to take it to the next level, and then keep these grid views open every now and again to make sure that you're roughly matching the outline. Once we've gotten through this first stage of matching proportions to these two images, we can move on to loading in a 3/4 view. And in that 3/4 view, we can match up a few more proportions and then start working with multiple view angles to really make sure all the proportions are correct on our character and we've got a good base to work from. So I'm going to use one of the new features of ZBrush called see-through mode. See-through mode is located at the top of the menus, and all it does is takes the ZBrush window, the program, and adjusts the transparency of it. I highly suggest that you make a hotkey for this. And I've just used E, but Shift E works, or anything that just is sort of at hand, because we adjust this quite a lot. Now, how see-through works is that you take your reference images folder, open up one of your references. Let's take this side view, this 3/4 view. We just put it in the background of our ZBrush window somewhere and go back into our application. We can turn off the floor and we can just adjust the see-through slider so we can see our reference image behind. Now, putting it to something like about 40, we can then match up our head reference roughly to where it would be. And we can start pulling around our object to match this reference. So how do I save this view? Because every time I want to come back to this, I'm going to have to match this head back up again. We can save this. We just need to go into the ZBrush properties, which is in the Document tab. Scroll down to ZBrush properties, and we have two custom views which we can use to store the current views that we're using. So if I just click on Custom 1, and then I move it around a little bit or scale the model up and down, and then go back and click on Custom 1, it'll always revert to this view. Another method of using reference images is to use Spotlight. Now, the way that Spotlight works is you load images into it, and you can use those, adjust those images, and use those in your texturing, or as in your reference, or sculpt through to create certain patterns or effects. Now, if we go to the Texture tab, and we go to Import Image, I will select an image, for example, this one where he's looking down. If we select that and click Add to Spotlight, it'll appear in our viewport canvas. And we've got a few tools here which we can use to adjust the size and the rotation values of our Spotlight image. And we can also adjust the opacity. So we can put it anywhere we want on our canvas, hit Z to drop the spotlight, and then we can adjust our model, look at in the views, move it to roughly fit our reference. And we can then use the Move tool to adjust certain elements to match up. This is a nice method of working. It allows you to use multiple images and keep them all stored. But again, it uses the same concept of saving views using the ZBrush properties. Pick up ZBrush again by hitting Z. We can move that one aside. And we can load in another reference image. For example, this 3/4 one. Now we've got both of our images here, which we can adjust the size of. And put together a little workspace where I can drop, can check tools, check my model against this one, against this view. Move this about a little bit. and then check it again against this view. Or just have them open. Adjust the opacity, make it a little more on, and we can just again use this in our sculpting process to aid us in looking at proportions. It's very similar to using the see-through slider, except it's inside of our viewport, inside of our canvas. The downside is that we can only really use the move tools. For example, we can't use the clay tools or the standard tools. There is a workaround by using the pin spotlight button, putting the spotlight somewhere in the middle of your image, and then you can use the clay tools and the smoothing tools, but they're sort of based off the size of this image, and they don't function exactly like they would if I just hit Shift-C and turned off Spotlight completely. But it does give you some tools to work with to have these reference images open, which can be quite valuable. I personally think that while it's nice to have these images open, if you're working with limited space, it's a lot nicer to have these images just open in the background for you to use transparency to see through and have as many images as you want here, which you can then switch between you just using regular Windows functions of opening and closing images and layering them behind each other and choosing the one you want. Another technique that I find really useful is just to load in a background image with lots of views of my object in. And one of the ways I like to do that is to use Google's Picasa software, select all of my images inside of Picasa and go to Create Picture Collage. And that will create a reference sheet of all of my images in that folder automatically, which I can adjust into other sorts of grids like this, which is a fantastic way of just arranging all of your views on one sheet. And sometimes I'll do this for weapons or for characters or props and have hundreds of images on one massive sheet that I can just scroll through, which is so much more efficient than opening and closing a huge folder of lots of images and just trying to find the one that you want to look at. See here's another one I did with a barrel for my M4, or the stock for my M4. Just a see-through mode on. I can quickly come and match this up to any of these views. Now if I want to load this into my scene, all I need to do is go to the Texture tab, go to Imageplane, go to my Custom 1 view, and Load Image. I load in my reference images, and then click Store View. I can also set up this model opacity slider, which will let me have a transparent model as well. And I can match this up to any of these views in the background, or simply do my sculpt, keeping these in the background. So I've always got a reference now of these images somewhere in the background. And at any time, we can just clear the view with Control-N and then load it back up again using the Custom 1 button. All these methods just allow a lot of more flexibility in sculpting in ZBrush and using reference images. There are many ways to load in images, but really, at the end of the day, you'll figure out your own preferred methods. Some might like Spotlight or Imageplane, or exclusively using the see-through mode and never touching the grid view or anything orthographic. This is how the head turned out in the end, and reference images were a vital part of the process of bringing realism to this model. And I thank you for watching, and if you've got any questions about using reference images inside of ZBrush, just drop us a line, and I hope to see you again in the future.